Disclaimer, this presentation was produced and funded in whole with federal funds from the U.S. Department of Education under contract number GS10F0112J with the American Institute for Research, AIR. Carolyn Limpia serves as the contracting officer's representative. The content of this presentation does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the U.S. Department of Education, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial products, or organization imply endorsement by the U.S. government. With that, I will hand it over to our moderator, Marcella.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, Using Text Messaging to Support Adult Basic Education Learners' Participation and Progress. We'll be hearing from Judy Alamprese, Principal Scientist from Abt Associates, and I-Fang Cheng, Associate at Abt Associates. Today is March 30th, 2022. We are so glad that you're here with us today. As a reminder, today's webinar will run about an hour and a half. So for those of you on the East Coast, we'll be done at 4:30, and for those of you on the West Coast, that'll be 1:30 p.m. We hope that you'll be able to stay with us the whole time. Just a little bit about our Universal Technical Assistance webinars. Today's session is part of an ongoing series that we have for Links Universal Technical Assistance. We like to call it our Wednesday webinar series. It's a monthly series on topics that matter most to the field. So hopefully you really see a lot of benefit from it. The series is intended to support states in building their capacity in important areas. And always a question that we get, the webinars are going to be recorded and they will be available on the Links YouTube channel very soon. If we can go to the next slide. Before we jump in, I did want to share with you a couple of resources that are available to you through Links. First, in the Links resource collection, we have the Technology-Based Coaching in Adult Education Toolkit. And Long, if you can put that link in the chat so that everybody can access it. And Judy and I-Fang will be talking a little bit more about that. If you'd like to continue the conversation that we'll be starting today, in our Links community, I encourage you to join our Integrating Technology group. We have wonderful discussions in there that I think you'll really find to be of great interest to you. Next slide. All right, so let's meet our presenters. Enough from me. Judy Alamprese is a Principal Scientist at Abt Associates, where she leads Abt's adult learning work and directs research, evaluation, and technical assistance projects in adult education and workforce development. She is currently directing 2 projects on the use of text messaging in adult education: the Octave-funded Technology-Based Coaching in Adult Education project, which is the topic of today's webinar, and the IES-funded experimental study of the effects of the transition planning process on adult basic skills learners' GED attainment and post-secondary enrollment. She is also the co-principal investigator of the IES-funded Create Adult Skills Network. She previously served as principal investigator of the Advancing Innovation in Adult Education project, for which she and I-Fang Cheng wrote 3 compendia highlighting promising practices in secondary credentialing, integrated education and training, and holistic approaches to adult education. If you're interested in those compendia, those also can be found in our Links resource collection. I-Fang Cheng is an associate researcher at Abt Associates. She has over a decade of experience in adult education, with 2 of those years as an instructor and program manager of an ABE program in DC. She has worked on federally funded adult education technical assistance initiatives for the past decade. She is currently the deputy project director of the Octave-funded Technology-Based Coaching in Adult Education project, is working on the study of the effects of the transition planning process on adult basic skills learners' GED attainment and enrollment in post-secondary education with Judy, and was a researcher on the Advancing Innovation in Adult Education project. As you can see, we have wonderful presenters today. I'm really excited to hear from them. So with that, Judy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Marcella. Next slide, please. And good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. We'd like to begin the webinar with on the introduction to the TBCAE project and TBCAE Toolkit with just a one question poll, and would ask you to complete the poll. What is your role in adult education? Okay, I think we can go to the next slide, please. So our webinar agenda today, excuse me, we'll begin with an introduction to the TBCAE project and the TBCAE Toolkit. And we will then talk about the approach to using individualized and personalized text messaging with adult education learners, and do that in the context of the TBCAE Toolkit planning and implementation steps. We will present you with a case study of one of the participating adult education programs in the project. And then finally, we will talk about how state adult education leadership can support adult education programs implementation of text messaging. We would ask you to write your questions as we talk in the chat, and then at the end, when we have the questions session, you can also unmute and raise your hand, and we can hear your questions orally. Okay, next. Thank you. So for the technology-based coaching and adult education, TBCAE, has the purpose of providing technical assistance to both state adult education offices and local adult education programs in exploring the use of text messaging to motivate learners to persist in their learning and to help learners achieve their goals. The funder is the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, OCTAE, and the project has been conducted since 2019 and will end this summer 2022. We have two main products from the project, the TBCAE Toolkit, which is the subject of our webinar today, and the TBCAE Final Report, which will be ready at the end of the project. Next slide, please. So in developing the project, we wanted to look at the role of text messaging in helping learners achieve their education goals. We made two assumptions as we did this. And one of them was around the barriers how to address the barriers to adults' participation in adult basic education and how to facilitate adults' completion of program activities leading to goals. So the assumption is that if adults can address their barriers to participation and complete the activities that lead to their goals, the learners will have success in achieving their goals. And what we wanted to do was to find an efficient, cost-effective way for staff to really customize their interactions with learners and helping them both address the barriers and complete their program activities. Next slide, please. So the approach to text messaging has been based on what we've learned about designing and implementing successful interventions and on the latest research on the use of text messaging. This research has shown that text group messages generally have not been very effective in prompting adults' behavior. So what we did was in our approach was to look at adult education staff who were asked to do the following: to engage in a planning process about the use of text messaging and to send individualized messages that are personalized to learners' specific needs so that they would respond to the messages and could really feel that they were getting very personalized help. And also to for adult education staff to collaborate with other staff to access information to support their learners, and then to track what we are calling interim outcomes. And the interim outcomes are those small activities that learners accomplish as they move toward their what we would call high stakes outcomes, such as, achieving a measurable skill gain, earning a high school equivalency credential, enrolling in college, obtaining a job or improving their job, or completing some type of post-secondary credential. So we're not assuming that the text messages in and of themselves are the cause of those types of high stakes outcomes, but rather the text messages support and enable learners as they move along in their participation in adult education programs to achieve the things they need to achieve, complete their assignments, and make progress to actually eventually get to those outcomes. Okay, next slide, please. So the four participating states, the participating states in adult ed programs are shown in the map on the slide. The four participating states are Oregon, Arizona, Indiana, and Kentucky. And those are shaded in blue on the map. Within each of the states are inverted teardrops, symbols that indicate the location of the adult ed programs in each state that participated in the project. There was one program in Oregon, 2 programs in Arizona, 3 programs in Indiana, and 4 programs in Kentucky. Let's see, you can just go back 1 minute. The 10 programs in the project were able to recruit 423 learners to participate in the text messages, and we recruited those learners in winter and spring 2020, right as the pandemic began. And they began text messaging. One of them, 4 of the programs began in summer 2020, and the others began in fall 2020, and they went through to the end of that program year in June 2021. Okay, next. Okay, the image on the slide shows the cover of the TBCAE toolkit. And the toolkit is in the links resource collection, as Marcella just said. And the main body of the toolkit the date on the toolkit is December 21st, 2021, and it was prepared by myself and by I-Fang Cheng from Abt Associates, and was prepared for the U.S. Department of Education Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. So the main body of the toolkit contains the information on the steps for planning the use of text messaging and implementing text messaging, and the appendix has a number of forms and that are used for each of those steps, and a compendium of sample text messages that were developed for the study that we conducted with Oregon 6 Adult Basic Skills programs. So that gives you a quick bird's eye view of what's in the toolkit. Next slide, please. Next, we want to discuss the TBCAE toolkit in terms of the planning and the implementation steps. And then we will discuss the activities that state leadership can take in supporting the use of the toolkit. Okay, next step. So we have a question for you, and we'd like you to chat your response. And the question is text messaging being used in your adult education program or in the programs in your state? And if so, what types of information are being communicated between staff and learners using text messaging? If not, what is the primary source of communication between staff and learners? So we'll wait a minute to give you time to chat your response.
Okay, we're getting a few people who are responding. Some people are saying not much texting, but rather using Google Classroom and email. A few more, one person said they use email. Some people use texting mostly for attendance follow-up, reminders on homework, check-ins if they miss class. They use texting for reminders and email. Some programs are using it frequently for scheduling and following up on attendance and outreach. Another person mentioned that they use Google Classroom. Someone uses WhatsApp and email. More reminders or important information regarding classes, scheduling, attendance, retention. So we're seeing a lot of the same uses of text messaging, mainly for attendance and updates, sometimes used for instruction. People are using it for check-ins, and seeing a few tools like they use Google and Remind, WhatsApp. Thanks everyone for sharing all the ways you're using text messaging. This is great.
Excellent, good. Okay, thank you. So we see that range, and let's go to the next slide. So in planning text messaging in adult education programs, we found that there are 4 steps that will help to ensure a successful implementation. The first is to specify the goals for using text messaging with learners. So you start there, and then you identify the populations of learners who will be sent the text messages, followed by identify the staff who will send text messages to learners. And then the 4th planning step is to determine the options for sending text messages to learners. So next slide, please. So the first step is to specify the goals for using text messaging with learners. This involves reviewing NRS data in terms of learners' goals, attendance, their progress along the way, enrollment in post-secondary education, completion of high school equivalency, all the different data that you have access to. Also examining the post-secondary enrollment data, and then also reviewing information about learners' barriers to participation. So the first 2 items on that list are hard data. And then the other thing you want to do in thinking about the goals is to look at the types of data for the past few years on the outcomes that students consistently do not achieve, which would suggest that they might need some more assistance, some more support in getting through to their goal completion. So you start by looking at the data, figuring out in your program, what are the types of goals that students don't complete, and what are the characteristics of those students. You also then need to talk from your informal information that you have among the staff about what are the barriers that students are facing in not being able to complete. And so those are the 3 kinds of information that we have found are really helpful. So some of the sample goals, which are shown in the box on the slide, are the attendance and skill gains, high school completion, HSC completion, post-secondary enrollment, and then progress in IET, that is integrated education or training, workplace programs, and then job placement or advancement. So those are the goals. Now, in thinking about the goals that you might want to focus on for using text messaging, you want to consider the timeline for text messaging when setting those goals. So for example, you'd want to pick a goal that was achievable in the timeline in which you thought you wanted to try out using text messaging in the program. So in summary, you start with the goals, and then next slide, please. And the steps 2 and 3 have to do with identifying the learners and the staff. So step 2 is to identify the population or multiple populations of learners who will be sent text messages. And those can be learners with very specific goals, such as HSE and post-secondary enrollment, or they can be learners whose goal is to develop their foundational skills with a broader goal there. Also, they can be, the students who really have a specific goal of entering an integrated education and training program as well. So there's a range of goals there, right? And then depending on the goal that you want to support and the population of learners. So for example, if you were looking at learners with specific goals such as HSE in post-secondary enrollment, you would look at learners who were close in skill level in progress to attaining their HSE and had specified that they had a goal of trying to earn some type of a post-secondary certificate. So you would focus on that, and then based on those populations and the goals, you'll identify the staff who will send the text messages to learners. What we have found is very often advisors, coaches, navigators, resource specialists, whatever the name is of that intermediary staff that is working between the instructor and the learners to help move them along. Those are often the types of staff who are participating in text messaging. Also, of course, there are instructors who can use the text messaging to actually support not just attendance, but their ongoing instruction by providing feedback to learners by providing them with additional information as part of the instructional process. So the advisors, coaches, navigator type of person, and the instructor are the ones who will primarily send the individualized, customized text messages. Administrative staff also can use text messaging to support those, the kinds of announcements that pertain to all staff and that need to be more about logistical stuff in the pandemic at the height when folks had closed their programs and were reopening the programs in and out. That was used very frequently. And then it can be also other staff that you might have. So again, looking at the types of learners, their goals and their staff, and then figuring out what that combination is going to look like. Next step. Then next, you would determine the options for sending text messages. As shown on the slide, there are 3 options or questions that you want to ask yourself to figure out what those options are. One is, are staff currently sending text messages to learners? If they are, if so, what text messages, messaging tools, or platforms are they already using? And does the adult education program have access to a text messaging platform? I-Fang is going to provide information about these options for sending text messages in her discussion of the selection of a text messaging platform. So she's going to look at that one later. Okay, we will go to the next thing. And this time we want to ask a question and have you chat your response on what types of training or professional development could be helpful to adult education program staff in designing and implementing text messaging with their learners. So we'll give you a few minutes to chat your response.
Okay, so someone mentioned how to send text messages without giving out personal phone numbers. How to be concise and relevant. How to use plain language. Again, another for effective communication, what language to use. sample scripts, lesson plans for orienting students to the idea of text messaging for learners, strategies around the appropriate times of day to send text and receive text, platforms that don't require someone to sign up, thinking about what tools to use, training on how to use the actual platform that supports text messaging, ways to cut down the time required to text multiple students. So a lot of good thoughts.
Yeah.
In the chat.
These are great questions.
And we will be addressing some of these in the implementation section that's coming up.
Yeah.
If you do have a specific question, we definitely recommend that you chat your question and we can answer them.
Good, thank you, Yvonne. Okay, next slide, please. So next, we are talking about implementing text messaging in adult education programs. And there are 6 implementation steps that we've written about in the toolkit. And the first is to prepare staff to compose text messages that support learners' goal attainment. The second is to prepare staff to send text messages. The third is to prepare guidelines for staff's use of text messaging with learners, which some of you just actually asked about. The other, number 4, is to develop learner recruitment and orientation processes. Number 5 is to conduct a survey of learners on the utility of text messages. And 6 is to track the frequency and topics of text messages. So I'm going to spend a little time next on preparing staff to compose the text messages. And then I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne. So next slide, please. So the first step is to prepare staff to compose text messages that support learners' goal achievement. There are 2 types of text messages that staff can send. The first are the individualized and personalized text messages for targeted messages that relate to the learner's goals. And the second type are the group text messages, which are for general program announcements and reminders. And next slide, please. So as we continue with looking at how to prepare staff to compose text messages that support their goal attainment, we have shown in this slide are the types and topics of text messages that we have found support learners' goal attainment. And these data on the screen in the box are from the analysis of text messaging that we've done both in this project and in the other study in 6 of Oregon's adult basic skills programs. And starting to the left of the box, of the matrix, we have asking questions. And there are, so what we have found that both, of course, staff are asking questions to learners and learners are asking questions, sometimes initiating questions to staff. And these are very often about barriers to learners' persistence, program administrative procedures that the learners need more information about. Particularly during the pandemic, it was how to access to and the use of technology. And very often it's having the staff ask questions about learners' goals and then reviewing their goals for participation. So we have found a lot of asking questions and responding to questions. And to the right in the next box, we have the second type of our text message is the staff providing guidance or advice to learners. Very often those are around operation of the adult AE program or courses or the high school equivalency process on developing learners' success skills and then transitioning them to further education or training. So again, depending on the purpose or the goal for the learner and the type of text messages that are appropriate for that goal, that will help determine what kinds of these topics that one would do. Now, all of the text messages are aimed at supporting adult learners' outcomes, right? So then on the bottom left of the table, we have another type of message, text message, which is those that provide customized and generalized feedback. We had found generally that the more customized the feedback is, probably the more meaningful that is to the learner. But sometimes generalized feedback such as that's great, you're doing well, you're making good progress. Those more generalized comments are also very supporting. So what we are looking at in terms of the types of feedback are progressing academically and personally, learners attaining goals, kind of reinforcing and motivating success of learners, and then addressing barriers to success. And then finally, we have the fourth type of text message, which are those that provide information, materials, and resources. And those can be about participation in AE courses or program activities, use of technology, and then processes for next steps in education, training, or employment. So there are a lot of different topics that have been addressed in the text messaging, but we wanted to give you a flavor for both the types of messages and the kinds of topics that relate to those types. And next slide, please. So next, we're continuing with how to prepare staff to compose text messages that support learners' goal attainment. And the next slide is an example of an exchange between one of the learners in the study, and they're looking at their kind of their goal of GED attainment and enrollment in post-secondary as their goal. So on the left, we have the sample text conversation, and this is the conversation that was initiated by the staff, and it says that Susan has let me know that you have completed some of the subjects of the GED practice test. I wanted to check in to see when you plan on taking your next practice or official test. And so Susan, in this case, is the instructor. So the strategy that was employed by the staff in this sample text conversation was the staff had coordinated with other staff to support the learner, that being Susan, the instructor, and the staff followed up with the learner on the status of the learner's GED completion goal. So we'll continue with the text, right? So on this particular slide, we continue with the sample text conversation on the left, and the learner says, well, I have taken the practice test for math and RLA. I did well on the math, but not so well on the essay because I took too long. Math and science are my best subjects. The staff responds, well, luckily, that's what the practice tests are for. If you are interested in pursuing a degree in math or science, there are a lot of scholarships for women in STEM fields right now. We can discuss options when you get closer to finishing your GED. So if we look at what the strategies that were employed by the staff are, in this case, the staff provided the learner with encouragement. The staff motivate the learner by looking ahead to college financial aid options. Okay, we'll continue with the text conversation. And the learner says, I'd like to get a bachelor's degree in computer programming. Staff member responds, well, that's awesome. I will email you the link. The community college and the University of Oregon work together so you can start here and transition to the University of Oregon smoothly. So strategies employed by staff in this case were that the staff provide information about the transfer process and college degree program to support learners' enrollment in post-secondary education goal. So that just gives you a very quick sense of what type of exchanges that we are seeing. This one happens to be one where the learner has a good idea about what she wants to do and is moving forward. In many cases, the learners are less clear about what they want to do, and you know, need more assistance. I'm going to now turn it over to I-Fang, who's going to continue with the implementing text messaging steps. I-Fang?
Great, thanks, Judy. So this slide addresses the second implementation step in the toolkit, which is about how to prepare staff to send text messages. And there are a few components of staff training to consider when implementing a text messaging program. And as Judy said earlier, the first aspect is to decide on the text messaging platform or tool that the staff will use. So either one, a text messaging platform, or two, a text messaging tool such as an adult education program sponsored mobile phone, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Google Voice, or Classroom. A lot of you all are using these tools currently. In the toolkit, when we talk about a text messaging platform, we are referring to an online platform that is dedicated to sending text messages to learners through an online inbox. So an online platform does not require staff to use their personal cell phones to text learners. So the image on the slide from simpletexting.com shows an example of what an online text messaging platform may look like. Staff can access the online platform using their computers by logging in to a password protected inbox, which is very similar to an email inbox. Our project, we used both Remind and Signalvine, but there are many other text messaging platforms available. And many online text messaging platforms also offer a mobile app so that you can check for incoming messages and respond to learners while you are away from your desk. These platforms are also more sophisticated in that there can be multiple users for one account, and learners can be grouped by class or instructor. The platforms may offer a number of other features, and the toolkit provides a list of basic and advanced platform features to consider when deciding on whether or not you want to use a text messaging platform. When we talk about a text messaging tool, we are referring to either, someone mentioned using a personal cell phone or a program-sponsored cell phone. We are also talking about a dedicated text messaging mobile app, such as WhatsApp, or a messaging feature built into another platform, such as Facebook Messenger or Google Voice or Classroom. And you may decide that all staff will use the same text messaging platform or tool, or you may decide that staff can use the tool or tools that either they are the most comfortable with or that they know their students are already using. You can go to the next slide. The second component of preparing staff to send text messages is to discuss the training that will be provided to staff on how to use the text messaging platform or tool. So think about the questions, who will train the staff? If you have a contract with a text messaging platform provider, they may have recordings or training materials available to you. Some providers may also offer a live demonstration or training of the platform. Otherwise, you may need to identify staff who may be familiar with the platform or tool to provide that training. Also ask yourself, ask the question, what materials will be used to train staff? So like I mentioned earlier, some platform providers may have recordings or training materials that you can distribute. In other cases, you may need to create these materials on your own. And then ask yourself, will ongoing support for new staff be provided after the initial training? So in our experience, particularly with new technologies, staff may need several rounds of training in order to maximize their use of all the platform features. The first training may touch upon the basics of how to use that platform or tool, and then subsequent trainings may answer their questions or cover more advanced features that can help the staff manage their inbox a little better, or text messages in bulk to save time. It may be helpful to have someone on your team who is more well-versed in the platform or technology so that they can provide the ongoing support and answer staff questions as they arise. Okay, can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. The third and fourth component of staff training is about preparing staff and learners to use text messaging. So the third component of the staff training involves providing adult education staff with guidance around the use of text messaging. So you should consider providing guidance on the frequency of initiating text messages with learners, the frequency of checking the text messaging platform or tool for messages from learners, expectations around responsiveness to learners' text messages during and after program hours of operation, and coverage when primary staff are out of the office. So we recommend that program directors spend some time thinking about and discussing these topics with their staff to determine what is the most appropriate for their staff and their learners. So for example, you want to ask, how often are staff expected to check in with learners via text message? And this becomes especially important if and when the learners are unresponsive. So it can start getting a little uncomfortable if you keep nudging the learners and you don't ever receive a response. So talk about, how you want to address that with learners. When is a good time to check in with the learners face-to-face, by phone, or by email to see whether or not, one, are they receiving the text messages? And two, if there's any other way of communicating with them that might be a little bit more better for them. Also think about, does the program want to require staff to check and respond to text messages once a day, twice a day, or more? Think about what is the expectation around responsiveness. So some staff that we worked with are comfortable sending text messages at all hours of the day, and others are not. So you will want to provide some guidelines around responsiveness during and after the program's hours of operation. And also think about coverage. Will another staff take over communicating via text message with the learners when the primary staff is either out of office, on vacation, or leave? And if so, who will that be? So this is when a text messaging platform is helpful because multiple users can have access to the same group of learners, view the same historical conversation string, and can serve as a substitute when the primary staff is out of office. Or it helps to maintain consistency in communication if staff leaves and a new staff is taking that person's place. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? And this slide is a continuation of the implementation steps 3 and 4 on preparing staff and learners to use text messaging. So the fourth component around staff training is on recruitment and orientation of adult education learners to text messaging. So when we're recruiting learners to participate, staff will want to share information on the purpose of text messaging, the information about the timeline for text messaging, such as the time frame for when they will receive messages, the frequency of text messages they can anticipate receiving weekly or monthly, expectations around staff responsiveness. Also, technical requirements needed to participate. We recognize that text messaging is not for everyone. There will be different technical requirements depending on the platform or tool that you decide to use. And so you want to be upfront about the technical requirements and if there are costs involved for the learners, such as data or text message rates. You also want to talk to the students about who to notify if their contact information changes and how will they notify you. So if their phone number changes or they decide to use a different email address that links that certain tool that you're using, How will they let you know? You might want to give them multiple ways, either face-to-face, via phone call, to just let them check in with you occasionally. In terms of recruitment, we have also found that asking learners one-on-one whether they are interested in receiving text messages works better than trying to recruit them in a whole class setting. And this is because each learner will have different needs and comfort and access to the required technology. So it is best to have an individual conversation with each learner to help them determine whether text messaging is a suitable form of communication for them. And the next slide. And the final two implementation steps in the toolkit, steps 5 and 6, concern data collection that the program may want to conduct as they use text messaging. So one activity is to conduct a learner survey about their experiences using text messaging, and the toolkit has an example of how to do this. And another activity is to sit down and review the text message data about the responsiveness of staff and learners to the text messages, and also to look at the topics of the text messages that are being addressed. So for example, program staff can set aside some time to review the issues or challenges that learners raise in their text messages, and then identify if there is a consistent pattern of the same challenges arising across multiple learners. That way the program may be able to think about resources or processes that might need to be improved to address these learner challenges and issues. I am going to pause here to see if there are any questions about implementation. So one question that Marcella brought up was, did you ever face challenges with participants not recognizing the person sending the message? They know their teacher, but they may not recognize the career navigator and ignore the text. So yes, so we, in our study, we have had multiple instructors and staff texting the same student. So we recommend that whoever is texting the student signs their name at the end of each text message so that it's clear who the text message is coming from and who the student is responding to. And in the toolkit, we have a list of tips for text messaging. And that is one of the tips, is to sign your name at the bottom of each text message. Another question, do you recommend using formal language rather than common text shortcuts? So this is up to the personal preference of the staff. We have heard some staff like to use formal language because they like to model business communication behavior with their students so that they're able to do that with their employer. And then some staff are more comfortable using shortcuts because that's the way the student talks. Right, so it's really dependent on your relationship with the student and your own comfort level with using shortcuts and emojis and versus formal language. Staff should have addressed the essay writing that students indicated was a problem. Support. I'm just reading through some of these other questions.
So I-Fang, I did answer that one
okay,
in the
great.
text. Yeah. So people can look at that. Okay.
Okay, great. Awesome. If you have any more questions, just continue to chat them in, and let's move on to the next section. Okay, so we thought it would be helpful to showcase a case study of how one of our programs used text messaging in the project, and I will be highlighting Gateway Community and Technical College in Kentucky. So Gateway Community and Technical College in Kentucky decided the target population of the text messaging program would focus on adult learners in the GED Plus program. So GED Plus is a joint initiative between the Kentucky Community and Technical College System and Kentucky Skills U. It targets GED seekers and co-enrolls these students into short-term certificates at community colleges. And these certificates are in the areas of healthcare, business information technology, advanced manufacturing, construction, and transportation and logistics. Learners who enroll in GED Plus have two goals: GED completion and short-term occupational training certificate attainment. In Kentucky, the staff that were conducting the texting were the college and career navigators. And we worked with each pilot site in Kentucky to identify the target population of learners they wanted to text message. And for Gateway, they decided to use text messaging with learners in the GED Plus program because it was a targeted subset of learners that had to go through a formal series of steps in order to complete both their GED as well as the occupational training program that they were co-enrolled in. So for example, learners needed to enroll and participate in the Kentucky Skills U GED program. They must complete 2 out of the 4 parts of the GED before they can enroll in the short-term occupational training program. The students were then encouraged to work closely with their college and career navigator throughout the semester to ensure they had a successful experience. And the goal was to complete the short-term certificate and the GED by the end of the enrolled semester and continue with their college classes or attain employment using the certificate that in their class. So the college and career navigator texted back and forth with 21 learners in the GED Plus program about the following text message topics: the status of GED progress, scheduling the tests, communicating GED test scores. They also texted about enrollment into the occupational training course. They talked about progress in the occupational training course. They texted about FAFSA completion for further education. The text messages also covered course requirements such as placement tests, immunizations, or background checks if needed. They also covered reimbursements for testing and background checks, and also the status of their GED Plus scholarship, which was used to cover textbooks and other materials to complete the program. So this is an example of how, if you can go back to the previous slide. This is just an example of how personalized text messaging was used to keep learners on track towards their goal. And you can see that it's very helpful to identify the steps in a program, or in the case of an instructor, classroom assignments that learners need to complete, so that you can send proactive text messages to the learners to keep them on track. In this case, the GED Plus program is a very structured program, and the message topics that our project team is seeing bubble up from the conversations is showing learner progression through the program and completing each of these steps. So you're seeing that we are seeing the staff proactively reminding students of the next step after they complete, a prior step. And it's very helpful to have a very structured program or understanding of all the steps that need to be completed to make that text messaging program successful. Okay, in the next slide, in the next few slides, we wanted to just share some overall feedback that the project collected from staff and learners on the use of text messaging. Here we have staff feedback on the use of text messaging. The staff feedback are from interviews conducted with adult education program staff at the end of their participation in our project. The first quote here, quite a few students in the distance learning program with all the prompting were able to march at graduation last week. They would tell me, quote, "You were on me so much, I felt like I had to do this," end quote. It was positive pressure. So we know that during the pandemic, it was difficult to keep learners engaged with everything else going on. So this is where text messaging worked to bridge the gap of not being able to see the learners face to face. The next quote is, for students who were more responsive, we both got a lot out of it. I was able to connect more closely with certain students than I have been able to in the past. It really helped to get the information we both needed a lot faster, and it was easier to ask questions and get them resources more quickly. And this quote shows that some learners do prefer text messaging to a phone call or face-to-face meeting. And for those who do prefer texting, it was easier to reach those students. And our last quote, before the project, I had only used text messaging to send announcements to groups of students, but this time I sent out individual messages. I think the students were more responsive to the individual messages. And this quote reinforces the use of personalized messages to engage learners. We talked about group announcements, and they're definitely useful for targeted purposes, such as for program or logistical announcements. However, staff noticed that learners were more responsive to these personalized messages that we encourage them to use in this project. And then we also wanted to share some learner feedback on the use of text messaging. So this slide, the learner feedback on this slide are from questions that the program staff sent learners at the end of their participation in the project. The first question asked was, did the text messages help you participate in the adult education program? And if the student responded yes, the second question asked, in what ways did the text messages help you? So to read the quotes on the slide, one learner wrote, I always knew what was happening before class and was more prepared. I found it easy to communicate. I got important resources, information, links, meeting reminders, deadlines, etc. A third said, if I had a question, a staff member was able to help me. Keeping me informed on what was going on with class if there was class, also giving me an easy way to get in contact with someone to let them know if I wasn't able to come to class. It keeps me on track with everything. And finally, it feels like you have some other type of support. So from the learner feedback, you will see that learners really do appreciate that two-way communication with text messages. They found out about relevant information from staff, but they also appreciated being able to contact staff whenever they had a question. All right, so I'm going to turn the presentation over back to Judy, who will talk about guidance for state leadership.
Great, thanks, I-Fang. Before I start on the topic of the state leadership, I just want to reinforce and kind of summarize a couple of the themes from what you heard on the implementation. And one is that clearly text messaging is not for all learners. You really have to figure out whether or not they prefer or would like to use text messaging as the dominant mode of communication. And you can see that what we were trying to do is institutionalize text messaging within a program as a program process, not just for communication, but for really reinforcing students' participation and really helping them to achieve success. And by emphasizing this personalized and customized text messaging approach, we found that the students, got the kinds of information they needed, were able to address some of those barriers. And also it keeps, the students kind of moving along. So one of the questions, of course, is in terms of what is the guidance for state leadership, in terms of what can state leadership do to support adult education programs in implementing text messaging. Next slide, please. So when we look at what kinds of state leadership support for text messaging might be useful, we find that there's, 4 general points. One is the state leadership can ensure that the adult education program staff have access to their NRS and their high school equivalency data. It's really important that the staff are able to look across the data, the populations of learners, who have been making progress, what types of goals have they not been achieving, and so that they can begin to figure out where some extra assistance and the support through text messaging might be very helpful. So they need the data to be able to do that. Another step the state leadership can take is to provide professional development to support the use of the TBCAE Toolkit's planning and implementation tools. We prepared the toolkit so that it is, we think, and have been told, it's very easy to read and follow. And it really is intended that the program director and key staff sit down and use the toolkit to go through those planning and implementation steps. And they have everything they need to do to be able to do that. One of the things that we do also see, though, is that sometimes the state office can be helpful with the platform for the use of text messaging. And that's one area where states have given some support to the local programs and making those platforms available. A third step that the state leadership can take is to facilitate or to support a learning community. As part of our TBCAE project, I-Fang and I held, periodic kind of all hands on deck phone meetings with the staff, and we found it very helpful for them to kind of talk about their progress, where it was working, what did they find out about students' patterns of participation and where they could intervene, and to share with each other kind of strategies for engaging the students. And it would be really great if there could be similar kinds of learning communities around the progress that programs were making in using text messaging. Another step is to facilitate adult education's use of the online platform, like I said before, the text messaging platform. By using the text, I went to get some lozenges while I-Fang was presenting so that I could talk here. One of the things that we did see is that it's important not to have to share your personal phone number if that's feasible. And the beauty of the text messaging platform is that enables you not to have to do that. Also, it provides data. So through reviewing those text messages on an ongoing basis, a program can begin to identify common issues that could be addressed by the program that you might not know otherwise. So there are a lot of pros to actually using an online text messaging platform. So next slide, please. So then we look at the state leadership encouragement for programs, and one of them is to work together to use the program planning tool in Appendix A of the toolkit to identify the types of learners, goals, and support that they might need, and then to encourage them to actually go through that whole planning process so you know what the goals are, who the learners are, and who the staff are going to be, and what the vehicle is going to be to deliver the text messaging, and then also to encourage staff to work together to use the text messaging implementation tool in Appendix C, which then takes the staff through all of those steps that I-Fang just described, and can really, I think, help the program envision how to use text messaging in a more enhanced way than is usually found. So that would be our suggestions for state leadership to support the use of text messaging. We are now, I guess we do have 2 more slides. So next slide. And we have TBCAE final products. We've just been talking about the TBC, the audience, the toolkit. So the audience is adult education state leadership in local program staff. And the content has to do with the approaches to using text messaging, coaching through texting to support the goals, progress, and outcomes of adult learners. the phases of activities in planning and implementing texting in adult education programs, and it provides the guidance for state leadership on how to support adult education programs. And then finally, there are examples from TBCAE are integrated throughout the toolkit. As we had done, they did before, the link to the toolkit, which is now available on links, was in the chat. And next slide, please. The forthcoming final product is the final report, which will have a description of the project activities. It will report the results from adult education programs participating in the TBCAE project, and will obviously have some lessons learned from the project. So that completes our presentation, and we'd like to now entertain some questions. You can either unmute yourself, raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask them, or you can write them in the chat. So I-Fang, do we have any in the chat?
Not yet, but while we wait, Judy, can you provide some other examples of how text messaging has supported learners that you've seen in your project?
Sure. There were a couple of examples, kind of more generally. What we found at the time we began the project in 2020, many of the programs were trying out new types of staff. They had been, funded new staff roles, and they wanted to see, and those are those what I call intermediary roles. And text messaging was thought to be, an appropriate strategy to use given the purpose of the roles. So at Mount Hood Community College in Oregon, they had were a rather newish staff role of a resource specialist. And those staff were really trying to facilitate, again, the adult learners' completion in that state of the GED, trying to then get them information about next steps and the like. So there was a lot of tracking of GED progress, and then going in trying to connect them with the resources. If there was, kind of some barriers they were facing in certain tests, they would go back. The resource specialist would make sure that, what information they had received from the learner also was given to the instructor, because the instructor is the person who would address, the academic assistance that learner needed. So what was really clear was that there needs to be good communication between the person, if it's an intermediary staff person doing the text messaging, and the instructor, and also between that staff person and any other resources that are available either at the college or in the community, so that the staff person delivering the text messages can do a good job in providing, connections to those resources. Interestingly enough, what happened after the pandemic, there's been some new effort there to try to encourage students who did not finish their GED during the pandemic to come back in, and they're going to begin to use the text messaging to try to do that, to finish up what they were not able to finish up before. Another example of a new staff role was at Pima Community College in Tucson, where they were actually implementing a whole new kind of orientation, first steps process to really help students acclimate to the GED and to get ready to kind of move through without in trying to address barriers ahead of time. And the staff person who was on point to try to do a lot of that early orientation and then tracking of the students was doing the text messaging, and that seemed to work well, again, because as they enrolled in in the program, they would ask the student, would you be willing to communicate by text messaging? Is this something you find useful to do? And those who said yes, then they did a lot of that communication, getting that person the information, the student the information they needed, and then tracking their progress throughout. In Indiana, we had another example, and this was a school district-based program that is used text messaging for those that were a lot with the students who wanted to enroll in integrated education and training programs. And the kind of coordinator there, as the students were beginning to finish that program, would meet with them and making sure that the students were, had all their ducks in a row, and then could get connected to those next steps with finding a job, because that was going to be the next step after they finished the IET, certificate. So, there's that kind of that connection point with next steps, post ABE participation. And I saw that Marcella just asked a question about, do we see changes in the outcomes? We are going to get the data. We are in the process of getting data right now. But I don't think that the text messages per se, I think what you'll have to look at is, and this is what we'll try to do as we were analyzing the data, what we see are two patterns in the text messages. One is that adults, as everybody on this webinar will know, have very complicated lives, and they are trying to, do multiple things. Many of them work many jobs, and trying to participate in adult education on a consistent basis can be challenging. And trying to also, I think, navigate the administrative red tape, quote unquote, of colleges and ABE programs more generally, often they need some assistance in doing that. So a number of the text messages are just trying to keep folks engaged in addressing those kinds of barriers to participation. And then you have other text messages are, as they're making their progress, if one of their goals is to attain a high school equivalency, making sure they get through that. Now, whether or not they pass the high school equivalency test is not a direct result of text messaging, but making sure that they keep at it will help them. I mean, a lot depends on the instruction they got and their skill levels, right? And that's, ultimately why they do that, but they have to actually take the test and then move along. Also, next steps for college awareness and college planning are things that can be facilitated through the text messaging, and we look at that. So I don't know that especially because the text messaging project took place during the pandemic and some of the data collection was affected during those pandemic months, if you will. I don't know that we expect to see high increases in certain high stakes outcomes, but we certainly could see some, more completion orientation. They were able to take the tests, they were able to take certain steps, and that's what we'll look for. I-Fang, any others?
Yeah, so a few people are asking about text messaging with English language learners, whether or not there are strategies for working with that population. Right,
and actually 2 of our programs use text messaging and with ESL students. One of them used it, she did not, eventually they did not participate in the project, but she was using it, and it was, she thought it was very successful, and in some cases she was using the native language of the students, so it was not English, so they were going back and forth, and it was around the same kinds of issues, getting the information the student needed, keeping on track you know, and staying engaged and getting a lot of feedback and reinforcement from the instructor. And then one of the other colleges did that as well. So it's feasible. I think the question is who the text message staff person is and whether you need to do some of that in the native language of the learner. In this case, both of the staff people we saw were doing that. They were doing both English and native language.
And then some student feedback that we did get was even if you are texting in English with ELL learners, that it was helpful because they can actually see a record of what the advice you're giving them and be able to go back and read it and understand. So if you're talking to them, if it's a phone call, you can follow up with a text message and they can see, okay, go to this link or do this, and they actually have a written record that they can look at to do the next follow-up activity. And it's great. A few people are chatting in that they do use texting with ELL students. It's great because they can use a translation service to translate English to their language. So it can be done both ways. You can text via their native language or their first language or in English.
Any other questions that we have?
I don't see any others.
Well, I think if there are no other questions, I think we want to thank you for hanging in there. It's a long period. It's the end of the day here in the East Coast. And we hope that you will look at the toolkit that is on links and then look forward to our report in the summer. And I-Fang and I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So Judy and I-Fang, thank you so much. Can we go to the next slide? I know that, as they said, it's getting towards the end of your day. So I want to make sure that before we go, we share with you a little bit about next month's webinar, which will be held on April 27th, 2022. We'll be looking at an overview of the HyFlex model and considerations for implementation. Like today's webinar, that will run from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern or noon to 1:30 p.m. Pacific for those of you on the West Coast. And Long has put the link in the chat for you to register if you'd like to participate in that session as well. As always, we want to make sure that we meet your needs when we have this webinar. So if you could please respond in the chat to let us know what questions you have about this topic that you'd like us to address in our next webinar about the HyFlex model and considerations for implementation. Training needed for teachers. Okay, great. I'll let you continue to think about that question, what you'd like to hear more about on our session for the HyFlex model. HyFlex, we'll talk about that next session. So that's a great question. I hope you will join us. If we can go to the next slide. As we wrap up, I did want to share that we're still hoping to make improvements to the link site. So if you have time for a 25-minute conversation to provide some feedback, we're going to ask that you fill out a 2-minute survey to talk to us. We're always looking for your feedback on how we can do a little bit better. And Long has put the link to that survey in the chat. We really appreciate any support that you can provide in helping us to improve the website and what we're offering to you. All right. And with that, just on our last slide, I again want to thank Judy and I-Fang so much for sharing with us today about the technology-based coaching in adult education toolkit, about the project. It sounds like a fantastic resource, and I know I'm excited to dig into it a little bit more. Just their contact information is in the chat. Speak to Judy Alamprese, who again is the principal scientist at Abt Associates, or I-Fang Cheng, who is an associate at Abt Associates. And again, in the chat, you'll find their email address if you would like to get in touch with either one of them. And with that, again, Judy and I-Fang, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us this fantastic resource and all of the fantastic tips that you have for how we can use text to get in touch with our students and help and support them. I want to thank all of you for participating and taking time out of your day to be with us for today's webinar, and we hope that you'll join us for the next one. Thanks again.